Thanks, Shavik. As we start on the last session, this will be a fireside chat, and this talks about another important aspect in overall healthcare and pharma, which we have touched upon during some of the panels. Would like to discuss it in more details. Basically, reshaping the pharma and health supply chain management. And to participate in the fireside chat, we have with us today Mr. Vijay Shetty, Vice President Distribution and Logistics of Alkem Laboratories. Can I have Mr. Vijay Shetty? And we have with us Mr. Madan Sampath, the Chief Supply Chain Officer of HCG Group. So, primarily the way we would like, since supply chain... Since the supply chain, we are looking at from the two aspects, from both the pharma and healthcare aspect. So we would like to specifically first ask upon some of the challenges in each and then see where they are two converging. So primarily what I would like to start with, one obviously many of the aspects depending on the impact of the pandemic, and we know that there were supply chain disturbances, especially in the initial days of the pandemic. So if you can tell us what was the impact of the pandemic on the pharma supply chain, and to create a more resilient and better supply chain, what were the initiatives that were undertaken?
Thank you for inviting me to the panel. When the pandemic began, I would say initially it was more of a chaos in terms of, because most of the hospitals which were operational, I would say our regular hospitals were shut, or they were only taking patients. Medical representatives were not allowed to enter the hospitals. And I would say the regular product which used to get sold in the hospitals, where actually the sales clearly went down, okay? This was for a month or so. But later on, we could clearly collaborate with the hospitals and the other institutes as well on phone, on on Google Meet or Zoom calls, in terms of what are their requirements, how we can actually fetch it, okay? The government of India also made things easier for the pharmaceutical industry. Like anybody who's in the pharmaceutical industry, the trucks were not stopped. We had easy passage of delivering the products to the through the hospital. The disruption part was that suddenly things changed, okay? So Alkem predominantly is recognized as a #1 company in the antibiotic field, okay? But what suddenly happened is that there was sudden surge in terms of the requirements. Antibiotic sales could dip. We saw a surge in vitamins. We saw a surge in certain products for paracetamol and other things. And that actually created a little bit of imbalance in terms of, at times it used to happen because at factories the norms were a bit stricter. If any COVID cases would come, you had to actually shut down the entire facility. Still, you actually do the entire quarantine activity, and after a week's time, you can again start your operation. So that used to get impacted, and I would say initially our stock levels were down, but then I would say when we were nearing the second phase, at that time we were very clear that not only on the raw material side, but on the finished goods side, we'll have to double our inventory days. So definitely we had a pinch on the working capital, but we made sure that the supplies were not impacted.
Okay. Thank you. I'll come to you from the hospital angle. Obviously, what you mentioned was also in terms of, in a lot of cases, the supply chain management depended on the timing. The timing has been critical. So, from the hospital perspective, how best the coordination with the pharma companies happened on the supply chain management perspective?
Yeah. So when we look at overall the supplier relationship management, right, that evolved in the healthcare industry only after COVID happened, right? Whether it's for good or bad, the importance of the relation between the pharma companies and hospitals really developed and matured over the period of last 2 years, right? Because always healthcare has been one industry where the supply chain was more transactional. Yeah? It was never in terms of collaborative approach. But post-COVID, the overall segmentation was created. Who are my critical partners? Who are my strategic partners for the business? So that has really evolved over the period. Today, if you see all the healthcare and pharma companies work together on several initiatives specific to supply chain. Right? Let it be in terms of blockchain to track the end-to-end product visibility, right? Where we are also working with few pharma manufacturers to understand where the leakages are, how to take control of the expiry management, how to ensure the stock out situation. So in a lot many ways, it has actually evolved and maturing as we say.
Okay. So, what are the sort of the tools, say inventory management, or when you are talking about sourcing also from multiple sources? So, what are the tools predominantly which can help in optimizing the supply chain, supply chain, and how are these tools increasingly being used by pharma companies here in India?
So prior to pandemic, we had a specific tool on SAP. We were working on APOs, that is advanced planning tool. But when the pandemic happened, we actually tried to look at making sure what is beyond that particular technology, which means that can we actually get the demand on the ground, which means demand sensing was very important because things were changing rapidly. And we felt the need that if we are stuck to the system, okay, we are not going to be ahead of the curve. So we looked into revamping our planning system, trying to see that, okay, how do we collaborate with our suppliers also, because suppliers also needed that kind of a visibility in terms of how the demand variation is there for the customers which they are serving. So to ensure that on the supply side we are secured, we had clear demarcation in terms of the forecast given to our suppliers with our requirements, and on the manufacturing end, we made sure that there is a demand sensing which is happening, which means that how the products are moving from our distributors to the hospitals or distributors to the trade, that kind of linkage was clearly looked at, and we looked into the demand pattern of like how things were happening. So with demand sensing, of course, a bit of, I would say, still we are working on it, but we are hoping that in the next 1 year we will adapt to new technologies like on demand sensing tool once it gets mature, and using some kind of an analytical tool like in the previous session we talked on a lot on AI and ML, which will have predictive forecast or predictive demand driven inventory levels. That is where we are now looking at moving towards.
Okay, so the demand side that he's talking about, much of the demand side will be generated from hospitals, at least a significant part of that. So, and when he's mentioning about applying predictive analytics on basically that data on that demand side that is coming. So, do hospitals also, in terms of obviously, because again, giving the pandemic example, when suddenly there was a huge influx of patients into hospitals. So, are there mechanisms that hospitals are looking at also to apply some analytics so that you can do your predictions better?
Indeed. In fact, for the last 2 years, it was more of as is requirement, right? Because we really cannot predict what's happening overall industry. Every now and then there is a new wave or a new requirement that comes in. So what we are doing now, since things are settling down, the market is opening, we are redefining the entire, let's say the VED analysis, right? What is vital, essential, and desirable? Because last 2 years, I would say mask and gloves became the vital one than any other drugs, right? So that can't continue further. So right now we are looking at what is key for us moving forward, because the last 2 years spend, if you look at it's predominantly the COVID-related spend. Right now, the general surgeries and procedures have started to evolve. So we are redefining all the new needs. What is the demand forecast that is required moving forward for the next 6 months or so, and working closely with the pharma companies to ensure that the supply chain is not at risk like before. Right? So today, in terms of governance and in terms of risk management, there is a clear definition for supply chain, which were initially more in the back end. Now that's given priority. So there are a lot of levers that's put in place in terms of risk management that's helping us to connect with our partners and make sure of the inventory.
Okay. Another part again, coming back to the pharma part, you mentioned the paracetamol example, and especially in the last 2 years, paracetamol was one we have seen with remdesivir or other. So there were these, whatever reasons, be it media-induced or whatever other information, there were these, I'll say, periodic fluctuations. And so keeping that in mind, how do you still manage reducing the wastage and eliminating redundancies when suddenly in the supply chain, because that's a critical aspect?
Yeah. So as far as Alkem is concerned, we never had, like when we talk about remdesivir or ivermectin or certain products, okay, which was claimed to be effective. So somehow we did not have that scientific confirmation from our scientists. What we did was we did not venture into it, okay? Not like other pharma companies who went into this and piled up stocks. Of course, yes, for Fabiflu, we did take a couple of batches. We had exclusive marketing for a particular dosage form. We did that, and after that, when we looked at that, okay, on the long run, we really do not want to play on this because we clearly see the risk on the inventory side. That's where we actually decided to pull back. But what we did scale up was on the, I would say, things to build on immunity, because we clearly believe that is helping, because health is wealth, and how we can help in terms of supporting that. So certain products to do with vitamin D or vitamin, I would say multivitamin, we have a nutraceutical products which actually helps in terms of building immunity. So we focused more on that particular segment to actually make sure that these are definitely going to be a running trend in the long term to come as well. So whether pandemic or post-pandemic, definitely during the pandemic, the demand surge was too high for all the vitamins, paracetamols, and all the IV things. But when it today also, I would say we are not very much impacted because we know that the stocks are going to sell down.
Okay. Coming back again on the hospital aspect, we look at the overall hospital ecosystem, one of the important stakeholders are the doctors and the other caregivers. So when we are talking about the hospital supply chain, how integral are the role of the doctors and other caregivers, and how is that coordination happening with the supply chain management in hospitals?
So traditionally, it has always been in the therapeutic committee, right? The main formulary is decided alongside the medical directors and the clinicians. So they decide which drug is required, and then the formulary is made accordingly. The the importance of the supply chain and the pharmacy department here is to pick which branch that goes into it, to ensure all the certifications are taken care of, to ensure all the basic criteria are met to have those brands within the formulary. But overall, we will have the operations, we have the pharmacy department, we have the clinicians and key doctors and nursing department for all the consumables to define the main formulary for any hospital. So it's a combined approach what is done. So once the formulary is defined is when we go ahead and start the negotiation and go on with the particular brands.
Okay. And this is a question to both of you. How do you look at things like a sort of scenario planning or simulating a model to basically check the supply chain resilience, both from a pharma's side and as well as from a healthcare side?
See, scenario planning, not only from the demand side, but also from the supply side is
Supply
also very important, okay? Pandemic had taught us that manufacturing alone cannot be the base. You need to have all the stakeholders together. So, for example, India today also is highly dependent on sourcing its raw materials from China or other developed countries, okay? So we just can't be complacent about saying that, yeah, we just can't ignore anybody. At the same time, when it comes to on the demand side from the hospitals or from the general physician side as well, okay, we clearly see that the collaboration with the hospitals and the institution is also very important in terms of trying to see, because at the end of the day, this is a win-win situation for the pharma companies as well as the institutions, okay? So when we look at in totality, when we plan things, we look at the complete scenario, what does it mean? Inventory is critical in today's context, okay? Though I can tell you pharma companies are bleeding with regards to their margins when it comes to, because the freight rates, if you have to import anything from China or from other countries, it's actually gone up to 10 times, okay? So there was a time where you were not procuring your APIs locally. Today you are actually going to your local manufacturers because at least you know that he would make and provide you. Whereas when it comes to the import part on your API supply, you are not sure because China just went through COVID and we know the kind of the loss that we would incur. So we were clearly prepared that this is definitely going to be the scenario. You can't be complacent and like trying to look at, okay, this is the only scenario which worked 2 years back and it would work. And that's why supply chain becomes very, very critical in the long run in terms of like how do you plan this scenario, not only from a planning perspective. The supply chain professionals now need to think like an entrepreneur, okay, saying that if this is not happening, it will have a repercussion effort on the other side of it. So if demand is impacted, definitely your supply side is not going to get up and like provide everything, okay, like, okay, yeah, you want this, it is not there. So they also require some advanced planning. So
but this supply side, this regional dependency thing, the China thing that you mentioned, and what you are suggesting is more a stopgap kind of solution. But this scenario from the supply side, if it gets repeated, what's a permanent kind of solution to that, this regional fluctuations?
see,
Or
the permanent solution is that earlier we were looking at qualifying 2 suppliers. Now we're looking at qualifying 5 suppliers, okay?
Okay.
On the demand side, now we're looking at, okay, the territory which we did not venture. We said that, okay, only we will look at now corporate hospitals, okay? Now we are saying that from the demand side, we have to also go further and also look at the other nursing homes, other institutions as well in terms of collaborating with them on the demand. Similarly, from the other part as well, when you talk about, okay, pharma industry is facing competition, let's say from the funded companies like PharmEasy's or the NetMeds or the 1mgs of the world. How do you actually face that, okay? Ultimately, they are also selling Alkem's product into the market, but then how do you ensure that the supply gap arrangement is actually making sure that the surge when it happens, you clearly have inventory, because ultimately these companies are not manufacturing that product. Alkem is manufacturing the product, or manufacturing companies are manufacturing them. So one has to keep a tab, keep all the stakeholders clearly looked at. The predictability part becomes very, very crucial here. So when planning the scenario, one is the risk mitigation action. If you don't have a BCP in terms of, like, if anything happens or your plant shutdowns, anything happens, what will happen? Okay, whether you will be able to supply or not supply, that also has to be looked at. So I can give you a classical example just because of the scenario planning. Okay, there's something called as a multivitamin. I'm sure many must have heard about this brand called Zincovit. Okay, it's a multivitamin. Okay, the moment we got to know that Zincovit plant has shut down, Alkem clearly came up with a new brand saying that this is what it is, okay? And our product, it's not that we replaced the brand, but we took opportunity of that particular situation and made sure more and more products for our organizations is actually getting consumed in the market, because people required those drugs, okay?
So that would require very fast coordination with marketing also to...
Exactly. As I said, supply chain professionals now cannot be sitting in one place and saying that ki wo aayega, I will then look at things and all that. They have to think like an entrepreneur now.
Exactly.
Okay? It has to be that way.
It's a very interesting example. From the hospital perspective, the funding or budget is very critical, and that budgeting or funding can often be a challenge on the supply chain management, especially as you are coming from the demand side more. So how do you align with the budgetary challenges, even maintaining the proper supply chain?
So during the last couple of years, it has always been a challenge with the finance folks, right? So we go for a particular need, and there are a lot of constraints on the cash flow management as well. While we work with operations, the demand on one side is increasing, where we do have supply issues coming from our partners, and the finance wants to retain the cash flow, right? So today what we do is we work closely, as he said, we work closely with the marketing team, with the operations, with the finance, to clearly understand how far we need to stretch and what is the risk that can be taken in terms of the overall increasing our inventory as well, right? So with marketing, it all depends on what kind of schemes they go into, which region they are targeting on for the following month or following quarter. Because today we have, let's say, 26 hospitals across the network in 12 cities, right? So we need to focus on what is my fast-moving drugs and what is going to be the next upcoming procedure or new doctor who's going to join. If he's got a separate target of increasing all his procedures, whether I need to relook into my overall forecast and planning as well. So today we work with finance hand in hand to ensure that there are no issues on the cash flow overall. But yes, budgeting is something where today supply chain is more and more added into the discussion. Like you clearly mentioned, we are not in the back office anymore. We sit along with the operations team to ensure what is needed for the hospital for the next quarter, and also we take care of the overall budgeting exercise for the year as well. Let it be on the capital equipments, let it be on the new projects that comes in, let it be on the pharmaceutical and the consumable requirements.
Okay, thank you. So before we conclude, with each of you looking ahead, maybe next 18 to 24 months, if we look at it, what you feel are going to be the key focus areas for supply chain management, and what are the areas where you are expecting to see changes?
See, I think in the, I would say, like, pharmaceutical organization work predominantly in two major verticals. One is the trade business and one is the hospital business, okay? So what we looked into, like during this pandemic, was that order taking, receiving the order or giving in the visibility of the inventory, okay, was a challenge. So what we are doing is we are digitalizing the entire order to cash process, okay.
Okay.
So instead of like putting checks, we are now saying that let's pay digitally, okay. You would get to know what is happening on our clear portal. Similarly with hospitals, what we are trying to do is like similarly like big hospital like HCG, Fortis and other things, we're trying to collaborate so that the entire order management gets digitalized, and also they see inventory, okay. So instead of they keeping huge inventory at their end, we can have our distributors maintain some kind of an inventory levels, and the moment it moves down, we can auto replenish, so that any given point of time during the spike or like they can run with a minimum inventory. I think that's where the funding topic that he talked about. So how can we also look come to the rescue here in terms of like hospitals keeping those minimum inventory, and like it could be replenished by our distributors as and when required, okay. So this is one action that we are targeting. At the same time, we are looking at data in a big way, okay, where exactly the sales are happening, okay. Today, one of the challenges that we also face many times, because when it comes to pharmaceutical for trade and for hospitals, the pricings are different. In fact, like pricings are more attractive when it comes to hospital because there is a bulk purchase involved. Our challenge as a supply chain professionals is that many a times these products, they come into the trade market, okay? And we have complaints coming from our trade partners saying that we're not able to sell because like you are giving some extra discount and it is flowing. So we are trying to collaborate with hospitals and trying to build a solution around it. As of now, we are still working under conceptual stage, and hopefully that in the next 1 year, what we're trying to see that to solve this problem by collaborating with the hospitals and trying to see that actual consumption is happening. The other topic that we are investing very heavily as of now is the counterfeiting, okay? Because what is happening is there are certain unauthorized distributors like who are also supplying products to the hospitals, okay? And at times we have found that they are typically counterfeit or they don't have that kind of a thing. So we would like to spread those awareness as well in terms of like how you can have an authentic product, okay, and make sure that the entire transparency is built in right from the end to end. The track and trace mechanism is actually also visible to our trade partners or our hospitals so that like they are assured that what they're buying a genuine product.
Okay. So before I ask your opinion, one important point you mentioned about the counterfeit products, and especially from the hospital side, what are the measures you are taking to sort of, if not eradicate, ideally it should be eradicated completely, but minimize the counterfeit? And overall, the same question from the hospital perspective, next 18 to 24 months, what are you see as a priority areas in supply chain?
See, today there is way more focus on especially hospital supply chain, right, than it was pre-COVID, I would say. So everyone is looking at, okay, what are these guys going to do in terms of technology and digitization, right? So before we jump into bringing in new tools, new technology, I think it's more important to analyze the maturity and the complexity of the hospital supply chain today, right? Do we have the skilled manpower to whatever tools we bring in to work on it, to deploy and then make sure the results are taken care of? So as a short term, the first target is to train the people, train the manpower, understand the needs. I think majority of the issue goes into the end-to-end supply chain, right? I need to understand what is happening at the pharmaceutical end from their warehouse till it reaches the patient. Where does the product go? What is the overall the supply chain visibility of these products? And where can the technology help me? Right? I don't want to simply bring in a tool or digitize the entire supply chain and still work on Excels and write in a paper. So today, the important need, what I'm looking at is understand what I really need, what kind of tool brings what outcome, how does it justify the spend overall, right? And also ensure that whatever we put in has a long-term value to it, instead of just plugging in a software and say, okay, it's going to help me optimize the overall situation. We need to understand what exactly is needed, right?
Okay. So thanks. I would like to invite is Gopi is there. So before we conclude, thanks to both of you for participating in the fireside chat on supply chain. And I would invite Gopi Krishna Arora to come on stage to hand over the leadership award to both of you. Vijay Shetty. Madan Sampath. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all the delegates who are present and those outside also. So with this session, we conclude the today's HealthTech Conclave, and we would again like to thank all the partners who supported us, Dell Technologies, Numen, Citrix, Murata Bios, Pinnacle, and I would also like to take this opportunity to announce that the next edition of the HealthTech Innovation Conclave, we are going south towards Hyderabad, and in a couple of months, we will be having this next edition of the HealthTech Conclave in Hyderabad, and we would share with you in a few days' time all the details regarding, so any of your peers and colleagues and partners who would like to participate in the conclave in Hyderabad are most welcome. So with that, thanking all of you again, we conclude today's discussion. Thank you.